What up, what up, what up? So, man, what up, guys? Um, Waiting for a reply to a text message. All right, cancel. So I was about to put a post up for a bus trip that we're planning, that the Black Scranton Project is planning for DC to go to the National Museum of African American History and Art and Heritage. What's the name of it? Where did it just go? Anyway, so we're planning a bus trip. You, huh? I can't hear you. Come here.
I said, we got some chicken for dinner.
Chicken?
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna tell you. The bad news, bro.
Oh, what happened?
I ain't taking nothing out of the freezer. So if we get chicken, we're gonna have to go out for chicken.
I'm okay with that.
All right, but I need to take something out. So if we have chicken tonight, we might as well take like some beef. I don't know if there's some more steaks in there. There might be some steaks in there.
So we get chicken today and stay tomorrow?
Huh?
You want chicken today and then stay tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll pull it out the freezer before I go to bed.
Alright. When you want to leave?
I'll probably be in here for like an hour or so, maybe.
Alright.
Probably about 7 something. The chicken joint on the corner, they stay open damn near 24 hours. They be open like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I've been plotting on some chicken since last night. I don't know why.
All right, we can do that.
Yeah.
Chicken it is. What I was saying? Oh, a bus trip to DC. So, oh, because it wasn't in my email, it was in Messenger. Okay. I was checking emails for it. Like, I don't see. I just looked at it. DC bus trip to National Museum of African American History and Culture. The Black Scranton Project is planning on taking a bus trip to Washington, D.C. in the near future to visit NMAAHC. We would love for you to come, but first we need to see what weekend is the best. Your survey will help organize a family-friendly educational day trip that won't break the bank. And so we have this little questionnaire right here. How likely are you to attend the bus trip? And we're just gonna put out a survey real quick and see who actually wants to go. And if enough of us, if enough of us can actually get up the funds and everything and grab this bus, we're gonna take that trip down to DC. Yeah, she said it's good. We had to make a few edits on it, but it's good to go now. All right. Yeah. And we had a meeting today at the Everhart Museum in Scranton, planning an event for next February for Black History Month to have the Black Scranton exhibit. at the Everhart throughout the month of February, and maybe even for an extended period, just to let the community really absorb the hard work and the knowledge and love that went into this project. So we talked about that for about an hour or so, put that together. I'm definitely going to have a piece of art in the show, which means it will be my first piece of art ever at a legit museum. Like
Oh, that's nice.
it's a straight like legit museum, and so this is a big move for me. Uh, Recently sold a painting. That was another big move for me because uh, people were telling me about the guy and says he's a real collector. Like I'm like okay, like maybe like he probably got like 10 or 12 paintings or something. Like no, this dude got like hundreds of different kinds of
Yeah.
art, yo.
Tell
Like
them.
yo,
It
his
was
whole
crazy.
house is crazy, yo. Like this dude really collects art. Like he is a legit collector, and he bought one of my pieces to put in his collection, yo. One of my original paintings, which is a love hate situation because I love that painting, yo. I'm so sad I don't have it anymore, but I'm happy it's like it's in a good place. Like it's gonna be taken care of. It's gonna be admired. It's gonna be talked about and bragged about. Cause this dude got like he got like this little clique of people and they're always hanging out. So it has a good home. I ain't gonna lie. That's all I be wanting though. Is for my art to go somewhere that's gonna where it's gonna be appreciated and taken care of, so it'll last for years to come. Yo, I use really good materials. I use some of the best canvas. I use some of the best paints. Like if you take care of these things, they'll be just any other painting in the museum from 3, 4, 500 years ago. It'll last that long. It'll be here 500 years from now, so people can still enjoy it, and take a little bit of inspiration from it. Mm. China and Russia's bromance. The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Like Trevor Noah be jokey, but he dropped some of the latest news though.
Yup.
He stay on top of the news. He make little jokes about it, but a lot of people don't know, man. China is moving. They've been saying this shit for a long time. They've been saying this for a long time. And they're starting to buy up Africa.
China? Damn, what they buying up Africa for? Resources? Of course.
Wait a minute. It was on.
Terminal in Kazakhstan. There's a new highway in Pakistan. And a new rail terminal in Kazakhstan. A seaport in Sri Lanka recently opened, as well as this bridge in rural Laos. What's interesting is that they're all part of one country's project that spans 3 continents and touches over 60% of the world's population. If you connect the dots, it's not hard to see which country that is. This is China's Belt and Road Initiative, the most ambitious infrastructure project in modern history that's designed to reroute global trade. And it's how China plans to become the world's next superpower.
Kazakhstan.
It's 2013, and Chinese President Xi Jinping is giving a speech in Kazakhstan, where he mentions the ancient Silk Road, a network of trade routes that spread goods, ideas, and culture across Europe, the Middle East, and China as far back as 200 BC. He then says,
"We should take an innovative approach and jointly build an economic belt along the Silk Road."
A month later, Xi is in Indonesia.
The two sides should work together to build up a new maritime road in the 21st century.
These two phrases were the first mentions of Xi's legacy project, the multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. They're also the two components of the plan. There's an overland economic belt of 6 corridors that serve as new routes to get goods in and out of China, like this railroad connecting China to London, and these gas pipelines from the Caspian Sea to China, and a high-speed train network in Southeast Asia. Then there's the Maritime Silk Road, a chain of seaports stretching from the South China Sea to Africa that also directs trade to and from China. The BRI also includes oil refineries, industrial parks, power plants, mines, and fiber optic networks, all designed to make it easier for the world to trade with China. So far, over 60 countries have reportedly signed agreements for these projects. And the list is growing because China promotes it as a win-win for everyone. Take, for example, the BRI's flagship project, Pakistan. Like many countries in Central and South Asia, Pakistan has a stagnant economy and a corruption problem. It wasn't a popular place for foreign investment, that is, until China came along. In 2001, China offered to build a brand new port in the small fishing town Gwadar. By 2018, the port, as well as a highway and railway networks, became a $62 billion corridor within the BRI. It's where the economic belt meets the Maritime Silk Road, and it seemed to benefit both countries. Pakistan saw its highest GDP growth in 8 years and forged a tight relationship with a major world power. China, on the other hand, secured a new alternative route for goods, especially oil and gas from the Middle East. Through projects like these, it also found a way to boost its economy. Chinese construction companies that had fewer opportunities within their own country saw a huge boost from BRI contracts. 7 out of the 10 biggest construction firms in the world are now Chinese. What tips the balance in China's favor even more is a requirement that it be involved in building these projects. In Pakistan, for example, Chinese workers have directly built projects like this highway here, and a Chinese firm has worked with locals on a railway here in Serbia. China's involvement is one of its very few demands, and that's set these deals apart so far. See, typically, to get investment from the West, countries have to meet strict ethical standards. But China's offered billions of dollars, mostly in loans, with far fewer conditions. So it's no surprise the BRI has been a big hit with the less democratic countries in the region. China has signed agreements with authoritarian governments, military regimes, and some of the most corrupt countries in the world. It's even affiliated with Afghanistan, Ukraine, Yemen, and Iraq, all currently splintered by conflict. Because of China's willingness to loan money to unreliable countries, many experts have called the BRI a risky plan. Eventually, these countries will have to pay China back, but corruption and conflict make that payback unlikely. A recent report found that many of the countries indebted to China are very vulnerable, including 8 that are at high risk of being unable to pay. So why does China keep lending? Because there's more to the BRI than just economics. In Sri Lanka, China loaned about $1.5 billion for a new deepwater port. It was a key stop on the Maritime Silk Road. By 2017, it was clear Sri Lanka couldn't pay back the loan, so instead they gave China control of the port as part of a 99-year lease. China also controls the strategic port in Pakistan, where it has a 40-year lease. It's pushing for a similar agreement in Myanmar, and it just opened an actual Chinese naval base in Djibouti. These are all signs of what's been called the String of Pearls theory. It predicts that China is trying to establish a string of naval bases in the Indian Ocean that will allow it to station ships and guard shipping routes that move through the region. So while China's not getting its money back, it's still achieving some very important strategic goals. China's growing influence challenges the status of the US, which has been the world's lone superpower for the last several decades. But isolation is trending in the US, meaning that they are investing less and therefore losing influence around the world. The BRI is China's way of leveraging power to become a global leader. By building relationships and taking control of global trade, China's well on its way.
China is not playing. Like, since the early 2000s, China was saying, like, this is the Asian century. Like, the next 100 years are going to be dominated by the Asian nations.
It's looking like that. You know, we still using 150 mile per hour trains when they got like 250 per hour.
Yo, their innovation is crazy.
Yeah.
Their economy is crazy, and they've bought up so much of American debt, and a lot of people don't even realize how many companies with like American made, American branded companies have sold out to Chinese companies and just kept the name, and people don't even know, like, Americans don't even own them shits no more. Like, China is a superpower, and now they're rebuilding their old Silk Road and gonna connect all these massive trade routes together all over Asia and Eurasia, which is weird to say Eurasia because it's only one continent, and Europeans want to have something so bad they separate the continent into two different halves. It's the weirdest thing, but it's all Asia, basically. Russians are Asian. It's all there. But so they're connecting all these countries over there, and they're gonna be like the ringleaders of the trade hub. And then they're making military deals with Russia. They were even talking about taking the oil standard from the dollar bill, because no matter what countries trade oil with each other, all oil is traded in U.S. currency. It's the weirdest fucking thing. Somehow we got a monopoly on how oil is traded. But China and a couple other countries are like, man, y'all guys had a monopoly on this too long, and they're going to come up with their own unit, their currency unit to trade oil in. And if we lose the petrodollar, then it's a wrap for the U.S. And we're going to have to go to war with some of these motherfuckers. Like, we're going to have to come up with some reason to go to war, because that's our last economic engine, is our war machine. And in order to maintain the last vestibules of resources that we have around the world, we have to constantly sustain these permanent military installations in all these other countries so we can protect American interests.
They've probably been preparing for this for a while now.
Who's that?
America.
The U.S.? Of course they have been.
Yeah, they had to see it coming.
The superpowers no superpower lasts forever. And it's weird because, I mean, supposedly before civilization was as global as it is now, during the Roman Empire, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, and all these, like, they were only conquering the known world, which wasn't exactly everything. But even then, their rulership and their civilizations lasted for like thousands of years. The Egyptians, like a lot of older civilizations, just stuck around for a long time. Like, America is only like 300 something years old, and it's already about to tank out. It's like, come on, man. How old is France? France is a couple thousand years old. Iraq is thousands of years old. Like, and these guys come over here and start this nation. Y'all about to run the shit into the ground already, just trying to be the world's military power, bullying everybody since World War II. And people tired of it. A lot of nations tired of America's bullshit. Even Americans are tired of it. And I swear, like, if we just cut our military spending, man, we have so much money for so many other civil programs in this nation. But no, gotta go to war. That's all they fucking know is war, the war machine. Well, there is no war. We gotta make one up. We cut our military spending in half. Everybody in this nation to be rich, yo. We just have so much money floating around. But that's what America's scared of, is that if they ever let their defenses slip, then other countries gonna come in and take over the same way we rode tanks through other city streets, drop bombs from drones on their ass. Like, they fear that.
Yeah.
Because they already know, like, if the threat really came, something like that, the way we treat other countries, if it really came at us like that, they wouldn't have no alternative other than to hit the red button and launch them nukes, and then everybody's screwed. We all gonna die. Why is this painting taking so long? Details.
Russia. For decades, the Soviet superpower has been America's #1 rival. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis, meddling in the 2016 elections, and on Twitter they challenged Tom Cruise to an MMA fight, and nobody can figure out why. And just when we thought Russia's antics couldn't get any crazier, a few days ago they pulled this move on the high seas.
We begin this evening with a dangerously close call on the high seas between a Russian destroyer and a U.S. warship. Those ships coming within feet of one another, forcing the Americans to take drastic action to avoid a disastrous collision.
This image capturing just how close the ships came to a catastrophic collision. As little as 50 feet, according to the U.S. Navy. This video from the deck of the USS Chancellorsville showing the Russian destroyer was so close you could see Russian sailors sunbathing on the deck.
Sweet Lord. Russians are hardcore. You realize these ships are about to crash into each other. American soldiers are like, prepare for breach! And the Russian soldiers are like, Dimitri, take off your shirt. Let's get suntan before we die, yeah. Don't want to meet Jesus as pasty bitch. But this is pretty crazy, man. This is pretty crazy. A Russian warship basically tried to ram into an American ship in the middle of the ocean. And let's be honest, that had to be on purpose. Yeah. What other excuse is there? Do you know how big the ocean is? You have to really go out of your way to collide with someone. It's like walking into someone at Ted Cruz's birthday party. There's no one else there. You did it on purpose. Now the question is, where would Russia get the balls to play chicken against America in the Pacific? Well, maybe it's because they've got a new and powerful BFF.
Just as President Trump was meeting with America's most important allies in Europe, two of America's biggest adversaries were holding court in Moscow. It was a split screen tailor-made by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping. Xi calling Putin his, quote, best and bosom friend, saying he cherished their deep friendship.
The two enjoying a leisurely boat ride in St. Petersburg yesterday.
That's right. Xi and Putin have gotten so close They're even taking boat rides together. And not just a normal boat ride. Putin even helped Xi recreate that scene from Titanic. He was like, yeah, I'm king of the world! No, really, China's taking over the world! So it's clear, China and Russia are really hitting it off, because you only take a boat ride with someone if you really, really like them, or if they're enslaving you. But this is liking. Oh, and if you think Putin giving Xi a boat ride is impressive, wait until you see what Xi gave Putin in return.
The leaders' visit also includes some panda diplomacy.
During their summit, Putin and Xi showed off their friendship with a visit to the Moscow Zoo, where they welcomed 2 new Chinese pandas, a gift from Xi to Russia.
I mean, China likes you. One of the signs of that, alliance. Good alliance and good feelings is to present you with a panda. Russia got 2.
That's right. China gave not 1, but 2 pandas to Russia, which is huge. Yeah, because 1 panda can't make babies. 2 pandas also can't, but there's hope. And remember, China only gives pandas to countries when they wish to be close allies with them, right? They actually call it panda diplomacy. This is a real thing. Panda diplomacy. Not to be confused with Panda Express diplomacy, where I convinced them to let me use the bathroom even though I didn't buy anything. And technically, this is interesting, technically China didn't give Russia the pandas, right? The Russians just get to keep the pandas for a few years, yes. Which, by the way, applies to every panda in the world. Yeah, China owns every single panda at the world. So at some point, they have to go home. And I guess it's because China doesn't want the pandas forgetting their Chinese roots. Imagine if you let a panda stay in New Jersey for too long, huh? Yeah, then when the panda gets back to China, it's like, hey, what the is this bamboo? Hey, how about some gabagool or a nice fettuccine? Come on there. Anyway, I can talk about pandas all day, but the point is, China and Russia are getting super close. And the consequences for America go beyond boat rides and cute bears.
While Russia and China continue to strengthen their economic ties, they're also expanding their military cooperation. Chinese troops taking part in massive drills with Russian forces last year.
The level of cooperation between Russia and China has not been this high since the mid-1950s. They are combining forces against us.
They say Russia and China can coordinate cyber attacks and military moves that can knock U.S. forces off balance.
Oh, man. China and Russia teaming up against the United States? I mean, America.
How?
That's an act.
From countries that rule world.
Probably handle China or Russia, but not both at the same time.
Yeah, no, not both at
the same time. Imagine if in Rocky IV, Ivan Drago was fighting, and then Jackie Chan jumped in the ring to help him. Huh? That would be the end of Rocky.
But that's another thing too. Like when you do the statistics, yo, 3/5 of the world's population is Chinese. 3 out of every 5 people on this planet is Chinese.
That's insane.
That is crazy, bro. Like their army. If they really want to, man, if they did a mandatory draft, like, man, they just they troops alone, man, they start dropping Chinamen out of the sky, man, shoot.
No wonder why those the first kamikaze planes.
Yo, I got sons,
There'd be no Rocky V, no Rocky Balboa, no Rocky Goes to Space, no Rocky and the Sorcerer's Stone, and definitely no 50 Shades of Rocky. None of those movies. Now, beyond geopolitics, the personal elements of this bromance is probably something that's going to bug Donald Trump. Because don't forget, he wants to be a part of this club. He loves those dudes. We know how much he admires Putin. He talks all the time about he and Xi Jinping are great friends. So to see his 2 besties make plans without him, that's gotta hurt. Yeah, and I don't think that he's dealing with his feelings in the most mature way.
U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening new tariffs on another $300 billion in Chinese goods. This if President Xi Jinping doesn't meet with him at the upcoming G20 summit.
Wow, really, Trump? He's gonna put tariffs on China if Xi doesn't hang out with him? That is so childish. If you don't come over to my house and play video games, then tariffs. And I get to be player 1 the whole time. And what is it with Trump using tariffs in every legal situation? Have you guys noticed this? In every situation, Trump is using tariffs now, right? Illegal immigration, tariffs on Mexico. Xi Jinping won't have a play date, tariffs on China. Melania won't hold his hand in public, tariffs on Slovakia. But Donald, I'm from Slovenia. I don't care, pronounce it anyway, still tariffs. So look, it's clear what's happening here. President Trump, you're feeling neglected by President Xi. But instead of lashing out, why not work on your relationship, man? You know, forget tariffs, maybe talk to Xi. Tell him how you're feeling. And if that doesn't work, try and spice things up, you know? Yeah. Dress up as something you know China's really into. Yeah. Who could resist?
I should look up the writers for this show. See who writing all these jokes from. My picture keep falling in the paint. New footage from Mars.
Oh, you know we're going back to the moon, right?
Supposedly.
This is the couple who wanted to get away.
They announced
it. Might be going to the moon for the first time.
That's true.
Designed initially to explore the crater Gale on Mars as part of NASA's Mars Science Laboratory mission, Curiosity was launched from Cape Canaveral on the
No, not that.
November 26, 2011, and landed inside Gale on Mars on August 6, 2012. The landing rover was less than 1.5 miles from its touchdown target after completing a 350-mile journey. It would also go on to conduct planetary habitability studies in preparation for human exploration of Mars. Curiosity's 2-year mission would eventually be extended indefinitely, and it continues to send back images and data to this day. This mosaic taken at the rover's landing site in the Gale crater was created by using 27 images from its mass-mounted left navigation camera. Looking at Curiosity's landing site in color reveals the gravelly area surface of the Gale crater. The terrain falls off into a depression, and beyond that is the boulder-strewn red-brown rim of a moderately sized impact crater. Farther off in the distance, there are dark dunes and then the layered rock at the base of Mount Sharp. This image from the Mars Hand Lens Imager camera shows a small bright object on the ground beside the rover. The object is about ½ an inch long, and the rover team believes this object to be debris from the spacecraft, possibly from the events of landing on Mars. This is the Shaler outcrop, taken during the 120th day of Curiosity's mission. Its dramatically layering pattern suggested evidence of past stream flow in some locations. This is the view of the John Klein location selected for the first rock drilling by the Curiosity team, taken during the afternoon of the 153rd Martian day of Curiosity's mission. The veins shown give rise to evidence of a wet past and are quite common in the flat-lying rock of the area.
How many more hours should they just think it's going to take?
Called the mini drill test, Curiosity used its drill to generate this ring of powdered rock for inspection in advance of the rover's first full drilling. Curiosity performed the mini drill test during the 180th Martian day of its mission. This is Mount Sharp, also known as Aeolus Mons. It's a layered mound in the center of the floor.
Alright, y'all guys can't.
Okay, Idaho, thanks for waiting.
Hi, this call kind of relates to what Mitch was talking about. I called back last week about a call I made 2 weeks ago with Matt and Don.
Are you okay, Zach, with the idea that the sun is a nuclear furnace relying on fusion and shouldn't have burned out by now? Are you all right with that?
I am absolutely fine with that. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
I'd just like to double check. Let's get a baseline of where this call is likely to go. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, so when we were talking 2 weeks ago, we were talking about I started talking about faith, and it was kind of relabeled as a divine sense, and I'm fine with talking it in those terms. But I was trying to say that some sort of divine sense is a person would be rationally justified in believing in some sort of supernatural powers if they had some sort of divine sense of it.
So,
and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to misportray what you guys were saying. But I came away from that with the idea that if we only had that sense and we couldn't confirm it through either other senses or other people, then it's no different from a delusion or a hallucination.
So if someone actually had a sensus divinatus, a divine sense, then I'm fine with the idea that they might be warranted in their belief. The issue is, how do you identify the difference between a divine sense and what you think is a divine sense but actually isn't?
You mean, well, I'm not sure you can. I don't think that you could.
Okay. If you can't distinguish between the thing and something that is definitely not the thing, then you have no reliable foundation upon which to trust the thing.
Okay.
So, like, if you tell me it's 94 degrees outside, and we have a thermometer, and you are convinced that this thermometer is accurate, but we have no way of demonstrating that the thermometer is accurate, we then cannot use that thermometer to determine what the temperature is. We have to have a way to determine that this is in fact a reliable thermometer, and not one that's been stuck at 94 since 1928.
Right.
Okay.
And I guess kind of the point I want to make is that if it is the case that we are not justified in accepting some sort of divine sense, then we are also not justified in accepting that any part of reality is real or mapped to reality or is not itself just a hallucination.
So if we find a thermometer that we can't verify, does that mean that we can't trust or verify any other thermometer?
If we find a thermometer, I mean like all of reality.
No, I'm pointing out the flaw in your argument. Your argument is that if we can't demonstrate that we have a divine sense, then we can't rely on any senses, and that's simply false. We can demonstrate the reliability of interactions. Now, it's true we can't overcome, as far as we can tell, the problem of hard solipsism. I can't demonstrate that the reality I experience is real in the ultimate. All I can say is that I'm experiencing it. So there's this internal consistency of apparently independent verification of things.
Right. Yeah, right. But if you have, like, for example, there's a lot of different fictional universes which have internal consistency and which bound together such that, the truth value of one claim has a high ability to say that another proposition about that same universe is also true. And we have that sort of network in our own universe from our own senses that kind of corroborate each other. But that doesn't mean that the whole thing
you've changed the scope.
Is real.
So you changed the scope of this, because as soon as you declare that it's a fictional universe, you are asserting that we are able to identify that it's not real. And that is our ability to determine that a proposed universe might appear to be internally consistent to people within it, if there were people, but we have this external view that shows that it's fictional. You can't use that to then suggest that ours is fictional that we're experiencing.
I'm not saying that it is fictional. I'm saying that we are not rationally justified any more than the people in those fictional universe would be rationally justified in accepting that their universe would be real.
Okay, the people in the people.
We are or we're not, and if we are, then we're also rationally justified in accepting some sort of divine sense.
No, okay. The fact that people in a fictional universe might have a set of rules such that they could verify the reliability of a thermometer doesn't then mean that they can verify the reliability of any specific one or a divine sense. This idea, so there's a separate issue here of whether or not something is rationally justified, whether or not you have good reason to believe it. Once upon a time, given all the available information, it was rationally justified to believe that the sun went around the earth, even though it's ultimately false. That was the rational conclusion given the available information at the time.
Okay.
Okay? So
you thought that, so by that, were people warranted in believing that it was true?
Yes.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yes.
Were people warranted in believing that it was
yes.
true? Okay.
But what you're warranted in believing true doesn't tell you whether or not it is true.
Okay.
Okay?
Well,
however...
I mean, that's all we can get at, is whether or not we're warranted in believing something. We can't really get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, except that through this whole tap dance, there is no... I've seen no warrant to believing that there's a divine sense.
Okay. But that's fine. But I mean, but for someone who does have that sense,
then no. Not someone who does have that sense. Someone who claims that they have that sense. Someone who is convinced that they have that sense. They then need to present the evidentiary warrant for that sense in order for anybody else to be justified in accepting
it. Someone who actually experiences the sense, whether it's a delusion or not.
Okay.
The person who has that sense, it seems, would be warranted in believing that it was true. Or they would be not warranted in believing that it was true.
So on an individual level, there may in fact be no warrant. So this is how we tell the difference between what's real and what's delusion, is through independent verification. You know, hey Jen, am I actually talking to somebody who just said this sentence?
You are.
That is how we go about it. Now, the cascade is that Jen could be an illusion and all of the world could be an illusion. That's fine as a possibility. That gets back to the issue of hard solipsism. But if Jen comes to me and she says, hey, I've got a divine sense and I've been getting messages from God. This is a claim that needs to be testable and then tested before anybody else could possibly be warranted. She may on her own be warranted, but in order for that to be clear to anybody else and acceptable to anybody else, there's work to be done on her part to demonstrate this.
That's really all I was getting at, is that some people might be warranted in believing. It's possible that some people are warranted in believing that there is some sort of God or supernatural force.
So you're skipping the one little thing, which is independent verification. She could in fact be correct. But if she has not had any sort of independent verification of this, then I don't know how there can be warrant.
Because it's a set of beliefs. If you have a bunch of different, these independent verifications are all some sort of networks that build each other up, but there's no outside justification for believing the set as a whole.
Yeah. So this is the difference. This is the difference in epistemology between being an externalist and an internalist. And I don't see how, if you come to me and you say, I've got this divine sense, okay, what I hear is you are convinced that you have a divine sense. Now, I will accept that you may in fact have warrant, but I cannot be convinced that you have warrant until you present the case for it, and I then become convinced of this warrant. And if you don't ever offer this, or try to engage in some philosophical abstraction to show that you can't or shouldn't have to give justification for this, then I get to write it off as a delusion via null hypothesis.
And that's fine, because I think that if a person has if a person doesn't have that sense, then of course they would be justified in not believing it. And I fully accept that.
So one of the things you have to go to from that point, and I'm sorry, I'm sure you're ready to chime in. I have just one little thing left. Let's say I'm convinced that I have this sensus divinitatis, that I have a divine sense. What else does that tell me about the world? If I'm convinced I have this sense, and you are not convinced, you either don't have this sense, you're not convinced that you have this sense, and you're not convinced that I have it. What is it? What information am I getting from this sense? Because if it's about a God and a God's plan, is that in conflict with somebody else not having that sense?
In conflict with...
Sure. Okay. Let me make this easy. I'll throw my Southern Baptist hat back on. I now, once again, for the sake of this argument, believe in God, have a divine sense that I am getting information from God. If that information tells me that everybody has a divine sense, and you tell me that you don't, aren't we stuck?
That's kind of an indication that the sense is wrong, because it's kind of self-contradictory at that point.
Well, is it an indication that the sense is wrong? Hang on, Zach.
Then either it's wrong or I would be lying.
Correct. Those are the two options. Those are the two options. So how do you tell which one's correct? How do you tell whether my sense is wrong or you're lying?
I'm not sure that that a person can tell without some sort of. I don't think a person could tell at all.
Yeah, I don't either. And this is why I'm happier to talk to you than I am to somebody like Cy Ten Bruggencate, because Cy is convinced that I do, in fact, not only believe in God, but know that God exists. This is from his sense. And so anytime I say that I don't believe this or I don't have this sense, he is convinced that I'm lying. And in that scenario, the only thing we've learned is that he's convinced he cannot possibly be wrong, and that there's no way for us to tell whether or not he's right. So what use is a sense in that scenario where there's a conflict? We can't resolve it. So what is it about the divine sense that you're trying to get to that you think has value other than just, like, for example, Zach, if you're convinced you have a divine sense and we can't test it, we can't demonstrate it, we can't seemingly investigate it, what is it about the divine sense that you find particularly useful?
I'm not sure, even if it didn't have a use, I'm not sure that it would not. I mean, I think that even if it didn't have a use, the fact that they have the sense is itself reason enough to
but you can't demonstrate that they have any. You can't demonstrate that they have a sense, and they can't demonstrate that they have a sense. They can't even demonstrate it to themselves because it's not. They can't confirm it. So what is the difference between saying I am convinced that I have a divine sense that I can't test or verify, and I actually do have a divine sense?
There is no difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's no difference.
So this gets us nowhere at all closer to demonstrating whether or not there is a God or whether or not there is a divine sense.
I think that at the very least something, if you have a divine sense, it makes the idea that God exists much more plausible.
Okay, and if I have a rabbit sense, that means that I find the idea that rabbits are sentient and magical.
And the Easter Bunny is real.
The Easter Bunny, there we go. But there's a difference between having a sense and being. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you actually had a sense that the Easter Bunny is real, then either it's a delusion, or the thing with the Easter Bunny is that you can kind of confirm that with your other senses. The idea that the Easter Bunny is real
then
conflicts with our other senses in a way that the divine sense does not.
Okay, what if I have a sense that there are universe-creating pixies that exist outside of space and time?
If you have a sense that that's the case, then you are just as warranted as a person who claims to have a divine sense, if you actually have an experience.
Sure, but is it true?
Oh, like I say, we can't. Our basis for whether or not we can say it's true is no better, at least no better than our idea that this network of sense experiences that we have is true.
Is it true that you and I are having a conversation?
Mm-hmm.
What is this?
Well, it may be true, it might not be. Personally,
but I use it to scrape the inside of the jars.
I don't actually know that.
You convinced that we're having a conversation?
Part of me that is, but it's not really something that's based on logic.
Then why would we keep talking?
Like, what's the point in the conversation if we? I mean,
if you are so willing to throw out the one thing that we would normally agree we have in common, which is a shared reality, if you are so willing to throw that out, why on earth would we have a conversation about things that you've already acknowledged you can't demonstrate? Because at this point, all you're doing is looking for, can I feel like I'm actually warranted in holding this belief, rather than whether or not the belief is likely to be true.
Has he ever turned anyone atheist overall?
Right. Can I feel like?
Not that I've heard.
I'm not interested in trying to figure out whether or not I can feel justified in beliefs.
I've heard people call in and they're on the fence. Like one dude is like, yo, I'm starting not to believe this shit, but yo, my family, yo, is so religious, like I can't fucking tell them, like I'm not feeling this shit no more. So they get several calls like that. Then they get people who like are on the fence and asking them questions, and at the end they be like, you know what, I never thought of that before. And then because they got several different hosts, and so between all of them, like, they basically know the whole Bible. And then so when you get somebody in there who's a hardcore theist and believe everything in the Bible, and then you point out how silly the Bible is, and like, do you really believe that? And then that even break people down sometimes, like, well, that was in the old covenant. Like, it don't matter, it's still in your Bible, yo. Like the old covenant. And then if God is so grand and infallible, then why would he have to change the rules and make a new covenant? Why his rules weren't good the first time around?
Yeah.
It's the whole thing is so weird.
I have good reason to think they are true or likely to be true. That is the primary focus. Right. And in order to prop up...
And I agree with that, but I think...
Okay, then why on earth...
I just was going to say, and I agree with that, but... Sorry?
Well, I'm not convinced that you do agree with it, because you are advocating for this idea that the impression that one has that they have a divine sense is itself warrant that they have a divine sense, which then becomes justification for a God, a belief in a God.
It's not quite like that. It's that the impression is as warranted. I take no... I'm not taking a position here on whether or not it's warranted. I'm saying that to the extent that it is warranted...
That doesn't matter. What if it's warranted zero?
The reality is true.
No. Okay, so now you are flat out denying... You are stating that your impression that you have a divine sense is just as reliably warranted as any other fact about reality. Yeah.
Yes.
You have allowed yourself to go so far down this rabbit hole that you are in fact equating things that even you have acknowledged are not equal. Because there are facts about reality which we can demonstrate internally and consistently with that. Which is why we went to the thermometers, which is why I asked whether or not we're having a conversation. These are facts about reality which we can test within the scope of it. They are fundamentally different from whether or not you actually have a divine sense. This is something that we already went through. So you don't get to put them on equal footing, just like you don't get to take any specific thermometer that you haven't been able to test and put it on equal footing with thermometers you have been able to test. Even if we live in a fictional universe, even if we live in a matrix, the fact that this thermometer, these thermometers over here can be compared to a standard and verified to be reliable within this, and this other thermometer can't, means that they are different. So you don't get to say they're equally reliable.
Yeah, okay. I mean, they're equally reliable within the... So they're not equally reliable within the network, yes.
So, are you more convinced that you and I are having a conversation than you are that you have a divine sense? Okay, then I see no reason to continue.
We don't have any warrants saved.
I don't see any reason to continue because you're equating something which you acknowledge is not demonstrable, which is entirely subjective and personal, with something which is shared, which is testable. And so if you're not more convinced that you and I are having a conversation than you are about a sense which you can't demonstrate, not even to yourself, then there's no reason for us to have a conversation. But thanks.
It strikes me that this divine sense of his is about as useful as the deist God.
Yeah.
It makes just as much, I guess, difference either way.
Yeah, the idea that there's a God that doesn't intervene in reality in any detectable way, yet they've detected the undetectable.
Yeah.
And what Zach is doing is affirming the unaffirmable.
Right.
Vouching for the reliability of that which he acknowledges cannot be vouched for its reliability.
Yeah.
This is the problem. So, and I know we went on that for a long time, and Zach's called him before. The sensus divinatus is this idea that theologians have tried to prop up because they recognize that they cannot present empirical evidence for a God, which is why they bounce back to faith. But yet they have this sense, and what they want to claim, which Zach didn't, to his credit, is that this sense is properly basic, that it doesn't need justification, that it is true and undeniable, absent any ability to confirm. And Zach wouldn't go down that route, and I'll credit him with that all day long, but he did manage to set himself up in this amazing state of cognitive dissonance where he was affirming that which he acknowledged couldn't be affirmed.
Which we could test that. If he ever got a divine sense that he could, walk blindfolded across I-35 today.
Well, I wouldn't actually test that. I'm not going to test things that actually put people in danger. So
I don't recommend that he ever do that. But if that ever came upon him, we would probably intervene and prevent him from.
And that raises
doing that,
the point that I tried to hit in the middle, which is this: let's assume that Zach's correct and he has a divine sense. That divine sense is not giving him any useful information, because any useful information coming from the divine sense would be subject to testing, which would then affirm the reliability of the divine sense, which means even if he is getting a divine sense of God, it is providing him with absolutely nothing of any use. And if that's the case, why have we now wasted 2 phone calls on it?
Yeah.
If you think that God is talking to you, as one of our other callers did, talk to him, see if you can get a message about what God wants us to know. And then call us back. We did this with a caller from Toronto last week. If you think God's giving you a message, if you have a divine sense, if you're convinced that you have a divine sense, come up with something that you gain from that divine sense, which is testable, sufficient to confirm that you have a divine sense. I got to be cautious about asking people to bring me messages from God, because somebody this week did.
Yeah.
In an open letter from a Catholic, which I posted on Facebook. It's really long and obnoxious, and I don't recommend that you actually read it, because it's exactly what you would expect from conspiracy theorist thinking on somebody on the internet. But he added a postscript, because I had asked for people to tell me what they thought God wanted me to know. And the message from God was, and I'll paraphrase, and there's language. I'll just warn you in advance, I'm going to say fuck, because that's what he said. Actually, fucking. But I figured I should give warnings about language. The message from God was, it's one thing to disrespect God and his son. It's quite another thing to disrespect your own body. stop eating so much, you fat fucking pig, you can barely breathe. Have you tried intermittent fasting? And I like this because if in fact there was a God who gave him this message, then that God doesn't want me to talk to him or find this God at all.
Yeah.
That God's just a douche. But also his God doesn't seem to know that I've lost 35 pounds and continuing on, it may take a little while. He also doesn't seem to know that I'm not going to respond positively to a being who decides to say, stop eating so much, you fat fucking pig. But what it does do is it convinces me that this is a crank who wasn't remotely serious. And so he's either not getting messages from God, which is what I think is most likely, or his God is just big a dick as he is.
Yeah.
And so it becomes irrelevant. Because I find it amusing because how much I do or don't weigh has no bearing on whether or not I'm correct.
Right.
And it certainly doesn't tell me anything about whether or not a God exists.
And if stop eating so much was an effective piece of advice for losing weight, then, people could lose weight just like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway.
Well, I just wanted to clarify some things as far as atheist beliefs. I've been watching the show for years now. One is, well, let me clarify. Do you believe in Jesus, that he existed or not existed?
Some do, some don't.
Well, what do you believe? Do you believe he actually existed in history or not?
I think that it's very likely that there was a historical figure that the stories are tied to, but we don't know much at all about him, and it may actually have been a number of different people molded into one after the fact. I have no idea.
I'm unconvinced that there was a single individual on which those stories are based.
And even if we were convinced that there was a single individual, I don't know how we would know anything about that person specifically, because if you go through, for example, the gospel stories and start, there's no way to verify anything. They're right down to the name or the date or anything.
Well, I mean, a lot of scholars would disagree with that. I mean,
a lot of Christian scholars would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have university professors who they spend their whole life, You do
realize there's university professors. You do not realize there's university professors who spent their entire life studying this who also think that Jesus didn't exist.
Sure, I agree with that. But if you go to Cambridge, you go to Harvard, higher end, very high end educational systems.
My thing is, I'm not going to say Jesus didn't exist. My issue is, I could say Jesus existed, but I don't know if we have a good record of his words and deeds. I could say Jesus existed, and I think we have a good record of his words, but maybe is not a good accurate record of his deeds, or not completely accurate. I could say, I could grant all of those things, and it still doesn't tell me whether or not there was an individual who was the divine Son of God who died for people's sins and rose on the third day and reigns forever in heaven. None of that is demonstrable. So to me, whether or not there was a person is independent to some extent. I mean, if we could conclusively prove there was no Jesus, well, then everything about Christianity is done. Which begs the question, not begs the question, I don't like to say that.
Raises the question.
Raises the question. If in fact this were true, wouldn't Jesus' existence and deeds and words be the single most reliably attested event in all of history to where there could be no question?
Be no question. In what way?
Isn't it the same? If it's true, it's the single most important thing in history, right?
I agree.
And it was, if it's true, not only is it the single.
Don't we have,
if it's true, not only.
Don't we have billions?
Don't we have what?
Don't we have billions of Christians who can attest to that?
No, we have none.
Today?
How many of those billions of Christians were alive in the first century?
I'm not repeating that. I'm just saying.
Okay, so then they can't attest to the reliability of the stories that we have.
True. That's true.
Now, if it's a single, if it was the single most important thing, and this is all part of God's plan, wouldn't a wise God make it so that there would be absolute, reliable confirmation of every single aspect of this, to where there could be no doubt?
Yeah, the people call it the Bible.
That's
a lot of people don't have issues.
A lot of people
don't have issues with the prophecy of the Bible. You know,
I know there are people who don't have an issue with the veracity of the Bible, but that doesn't mean that they're correct. The fact that you're convinced of something, you do realize that, for example, we don't have any of the originals, right?
That's a matter of opinion.
Okay, it's not. It is a matter of opinion, David, but also there are ways in which we go about determining whether something's reasonable to believe. Now, we have none of the originals, right?
None of the originals.
Let's just stick with the 4 Gospels, okay? We don't have original copies of the Gospels, correct?
Correct.
We don't even know who wrote the Gospels, correct?
I mean, they signed their names.
No, they didn't. No, the Gospels are unsigned. We have no idea who wrote them. The labels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are a matter of church tradition. That's not who wrote them.
Well, okay, I'll concede, I'll concede this part.
Okay.
Because I know where this is going. But,
well, if you
so you believe that Jesus...
Go ahead.
You believe that Jesus existed in history. What about Rome when they decided to make Christianity the state religion?
Okay.
300 years later.
Yeah, 325.
Why would the most sophisticated, educated country or in the world decide to choose Christianity?
Because its leader became convinced. Because its leader became convinced either of its truthfulness or of its usefulness. So now you've got a government declaring the official religion of Rome, not, hey, a bunch of people didn't become convinced of the truth of it. The leader declared this is the new official religion. Is that the way we should be encouraging adoption of religions, by government sanction and edict?
So no, I agree with that.
So why raise Rome? Because 300 years after Jesus purportedly existed, a country adopts that religion. That tells us nothing about whether or not it's true, right?
No, what it does tell me that something miraculous happened.
What's miraculous?
Be like the United States becoming a Muslim, all Muslim religion.
That would be a miracle.
Entity.
That would be a miracle.
300 years.
It would be a miracle for the United States. Why would it be a miracle for a country which had an official religion to change its official religion?
Well, maybe miracle is a little bit overstated.
Okay.
Let's just say a phenomenon.
Okay. It's an interesting phenomenon. Now tell me why it happened. Is it more likely that it happened because the religion's true, or are there other reasons that might actually be more likely?
I believe that the religion was true. It provided everything.
That's not what I asked. I didn't ask what you believe about the religion. You're propping up this country changing its official religion to Christianity as if it has some significance about the truth of it. And so I'm asking, is this change more likely due to the truth of the religion, or are there other explanations that might actually be more likely?
Well, there could be, but we don't have any. You know what's strange? There was approximately 3 million Christians in Rome towards the end of the era. But we don't have one letter from citizens saying, "What is with this fake Christianity?"
Do you know where the word atheist came from?
No, tell me.
It's what the Romans called the Christians when they didn't believe in the Roman gods.
Okay.
here's the thing.
Do you have one letter which tells me that? Can you point a link or a reference?
I'm sure you can use Google to look up the origins of the word and what the Romans called. But let's say let's say that I didn't have a letter. What difference does it make?
It's called proof. It's called ancient writings. You want proof. I'm just trying to provide the proof that you're looking for.
I've asked you several times, because when you offer something that you seem to think is a reliable offering of evidence for the truth of Christianity, every time I question it, you acknowledge that it might not be. So I'm just trying to get to, the fact that
I don't know. No, you're putting words in my mouth now.
No, I'm pretty sure if we go back and rewind, you put the words there yourself. But just in case you think I'm, just in case, David, just in case you think I'm tricking you, what reason do you have to think that Christianity is true and real?
What reason do I have?
Yes.
For one, is that I have the Word of God.
How do you know you have the Word of God?
Bible.
How do you know the Bible's the Word of God?
Because that's what the Bible says.
Okay.
The Word of God.
That's called a circular argument. It's a fallacy to use the very thing you're trying to prove as the proof. Do you know how many? Sorry?
Not if it's true, then it's not a fallacy.
Yeah, it's a fallacy whether it's true or not, actually. But the question is, how do you know that it's true? You can't say I trust the Bible because the Bible says it's the Word of God, because I could write you a note that says it's from God. Does that mean it's from God?
I based it on faith.
Okay. Is there any position you couldn't hold based on faith?
Oh, not really.
So if you could hold the faith-based position that the Bible is real and true in the Word of God, and you could also hold a faith-based position that the Bible is not real and true in the Word of God, then doesn't that mean that faith is not a reliable path to truth?
No.
Well, then how is it?
What's your definition? What's your definition of faith?
Dave, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what my definition is. And I'm going to make this. No, it doesn't, David. No, it doesn't, David. Let me explain. You just said that there's no position one could not hold basing it on faith. So somebody could believe the Bible based on faith, and somebody could believe the Bible is false based on faith, correct?
No, I misunderstood that last part.
You don't think it's possible? You don't think it's possible for someone to believe that the Bible is false based on faith? Okay. Why not?
Well, first of all, we have to identify what faith is.
Yeah, faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have a good reason.
Okay.
You're
a seminary student? Is that what they taught you?
Well, so how would you define faith?
Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God.
That tells me that tells me about how you get to faith. That doesn't tell me what faith is. Go over a couple chapters.
That's what it is.
No, that's not what it is. That's how you get to it. Faith comes by hearing. You know what else comes by hearing? Lies. Faith, the scripture that you're actually looking for, David, is that faith is the evidence of things hoped for. So you're fine with that?
I agree with that.
Sure. Except faith isn't evidence. What evidence you can't say, I take it on faith that the Bible is the Word of God. Because that's not providing anybody with any evidence. That's just a statement of what you believe. So even your own usage of faith is in conflict with the biblical definition of faith that you got. And because the one you offered of faith comes by hearing, untruth also comes by hearing. The truth and the untruth comes by hearing.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So, is there any position that somebody could hold that they couldn't just say, hey, I take it on faith, I don't have to provide evidence?
Sure. I mean, that's what faith is. You don't need evidence. You don't require evidence.
Yeah, except that I can believe that the Bible's false based on faith, right? If I don't need any evidence. Okay. Yeah, so if I can get to the Bible is true based on faith, and I can get to the Bible is false based on faith, that means the application of faith can lead me to both something that's true and something that's not true, correct?
Well, I think you're going down a rabbit tunnel, but...
I'm pretty sure all I did was took exactly what you just agreed to and exposed why you are unjustified. But we are completely out of time for the show. Thanks for calling, David. You can call back another week.
Because when you really analyze their arguments, they sound silly every time.
It's amazing.
And Douchebagians number 1 something.
I think it's 135.
That's it, yeah. That's okay.
Douchebaggins, by the way, is an apocryphal book that not everybody has. So if you go looking for it in your Bible, you might not be a true Christian.
Keep that in mind.
Anyway, you ready?
Let's hit it. Let's hit it.
Ironically, we'll begin with Faith in Leesburg, Florida. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. What do you got for us?
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm a theist, and I wondered if you believe that Jesus actually existed.
So I don't know, is my answer. I don't have a big problem with the idea that there may be some real person at the core of this. There's been a lot of scholarly debate on the subject in recent years. I have a friend, Richard Carrier, who's going to be releasing a book that uses Bayesian analysis of history to try and give us a better answer, try and calculate the probability that he actually existed. I'm far less concerned with that because even if he did exist and this was real, we still then have to say, okay, how accurate is the record of his supposed words and deeds? And then we have the question of, well, was he actually a god? You know, are these things that he said, even if we have them accurately, are they then true? So it's layers upon layers. And the only reason, you know, for example, if you look back at like Socrates and Plato, does it matter if they existed? Because their words stand and fall on their own merit. And that should be true for anybody and anything. And the only reason that this is different is because if he didn't exist, then the claims that, of course, he was God fall away right off the bat. So that's the only reason why it's really important whether or not he actually existed.
Yeah. Well, now also, you know, he was crucified and rose from the dead, and hundreds of people saw him after he raised from the dead.
How do you prove that?
Yes, that's a problem because the source, again, we get back to sourcing your historical materials, right? You know, what you have a particular passage in the Holy Book that makes claims about what eyewitnesses saw, what eyewitnesses didn't see, but what sort of verification can we apply to any of that? It doesn't seem like there's much.
The analogy that I've used before on this is there are living, breathing people right now that you can go talk to who will tell you about their alien abduction story. I mean, this is happening now and has been happening for years. People are coming forward saying, this happened to me. And you can actually talk to them and interview them. I don't believe that they've actually been abducted by aliens. Most people don't. And yet, if you take that story and move it back 2,000 years to where now we can no longer talk to these people at all, and all we have is anonymous hearsay accounts, how does that make the story more believable? To me, it makes it even less believable. So if I don't have a good reason to think that people that I've actually could meet and talk to have been abducted by aliens, then I certainly don't have a good reason to believe an anonymous account of a bunch of unnamed people that we can't talk to claiming to have seen somebody rise from the dead.
And it is an extraordinary claim, too. I mean, we're talking about, the basic question is, what is more reasonable to believe given the evidence we have? That at this point in history, one human body did something that no human body had ever done before or has ever done since, or that, you know, that these are stories about a possibly a possible actual historical figure, but that were then later on mythologized, fictionalized, mythicized, which is a thing that happened back then. We do know from reading other historical texts, I've read a lot of histories, for example, just ancient Roman histories written at the time, translations from the ancient texts, where the writers then were talking about popular beliefs concerning Roman emperors or Roman generals. The soldiers would actually believe in omens. You know, if an eagle flew over the camp or something like that, then they sincerely believed that this was the gods favoring their general and that the battle that day would go their way. So we know that people thought this way back then. They had these magical, mystical beliefs. It's not surprising that such stories, if Jesus was a figure who did some of the things that he has claimed to have done, that the people who believed in him and supported him would have just come up with such beliefs and tales themselves. That's not unusual. And it seems a much more plausible explanation than, no, a dead body actually came back to life.
Yeah. So I see what you're saying. I don't agree. I believe that that he really was crucified and did raise from the dead. But I wanted to point out today was Epiphany, and the first reading was from Isaiah, which talked about the rulers of the earth will bring gold and frankincense. That was written 750 years before Christ's birth.
Are you talking about the
Messiah? Yeah.
Well,
what I'm saying is,
actually,
it was written 750 years before Christ's birth.
Just a second, Faith, hang on, just a second.
Actually, the Jews don't agree with you that was written about the Messiah or that it was fulfilled. So, you say you disagree and that you believe he actually, was crucified and died and rose again. And I'm wondering why you actually believe it, because the why is the important part. It's probably more important than what you actually believe.
Okay, do you believe that the Holocaust really existed?
Yes.
Okay, there are people that we come from Chicago, and there's a professor at Northwestern University in Chicago who wrote about how the Holocaust never happened.
Yes,
that was just all made up.
There are Holocaust deniers. Unfortunately for them, we have a really good record, including survivors that rebut them.
Yes, and you have all the survivors.
That you can talk to.
Wait. You have the followers of Christ and their successors,
No, you don't.
You have the.
You do realize the Gospels are anonymous, right? And that we can't go talk to any of those people, right?
Who cares who wrote them?
I would agree.
The point is that those exist, and the apostles of Christ had successors that continued on and wrote, and the history, it's been going on for 2,000 years now.
Well, that's not evidence, that's anecdote. Yeah. That is, that you're basically saying that because this claim has been tenacious and lots of people have believed it, that it's believable, and that's simply false.
Okay, and it comes back to the quality of evidence. Remember what I mentioned before. Holocaust deniers are going against a vast body of very easy to confirm evidence.
And by the way, the Holocaust natural event, no appeals to the supernatural. It's very, very different from the idea that there was this person who lived and performed miracles that violate the natural order and then rose from the dead.
Yeah.
Then not all claims are the same. Some claims are extraordinary and require extraordinary evidence. Yeah. And by the way, if it turns out that there wasn't a Holocaust, that we have been duped by something, so what? My eternal in any way dependent about whether or not I'm correct about the Holocaust.
See, it comes down to this. Let me try to put some of this in context, so maybe that you'll sort of understand where we're coming from on it. You get farther back in time, and so it becomes a bit more difficult to come up with things to confirm the historicity of something, right? The accuracy of an account of something. The farther you go back in time, it is more and more difficult to find reliable accounts. That's just the nature of that, right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I'm researching a documentary about something that happened 130 years ago in Austin. Very difficult to find sources. The farther you go back, if I were to go back 300 or 400 years to some other, I would have a whole lot of work to do to find reliable sources. You're going back 2,000 years, again, much more difficult to find these reliable sources. Something that happened less than a century ago when you have photographs and film footage and, actual survivors who are interviewed. Okay, that's a very strong body of good evidence for something that is not an extraordinary claim. I mean, the Holocaust was extraordinary in terms of the degree of human cruelty that was going on, but it's not extraordinary in that no one is claiming any kind of supernatural or divine agency is involved in any of this. Whereas if you're talking about, again, a human being rising from the dead and becoming a sort of God-man, or having always been a God-man and fulfilling some kind of divine plan, you now have several millennia where we're actually separated from the supposed event, plus a real dearth of any historical document that isn't like directly from the holy book of the religion that is all about worshiping this holy man. You have an inability to find extra biblical documents that confirm any of these events. You have contradictions within the holy book themselves. Was there an earthquake? Yes, no. How many people turned up at the tomb? 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 20. The Gospels themselves are very inconsistent on how they talk about the resurrection, how they describe the events. So again, just to get to the facts of things, it's a whole heck of a lot more difficult. So, you can't just look at something that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago and say this is on an equal footing of something that supposedly happened not only 2,000 years ago, but also had magic supposedly involved. There's a degree of things, and it's a false equivalence to say.
And I'm going to let you respond in just a second. I just wanted one little thing that kind of dovetails onto what Martin was talking about. If we have a set standard of evidence that we use to determine whether or not a historical claim probably occurred or actually occurred, if we lower our standards of evidence to the point that the claims about Jesus are accepted, then we have no good reason to reject the other claims of other miracle saviors or other religions. We just have to kind of take it all in. I mean, the Muslims would tell you that they have the original copy of their book and that they have a much better annotated history from the beginning of their religion until now than Christianity does. And so if we've lowered our standards of evidence so far that Jesus gets in and gets a pass on all the miracle stuff, then we'd be stuck believing everything, and we'd be believing contradictory things.
The ancient Egyptians with all of their frescoes and their reliefs on their tomb walls, those are original documents, technically. But because they talk about, the Book of the Dead and their pantheon and all that, should we consider them credible just on those grounds? No. I mean, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah.
So
when I called last time, I was asking about the beginning of the universe, and they were talking about how it was a whole bunch of matter squeezed together, and then it just exploded, and that's how we've got our universe and our planet.
Well,
and what I'm saying is, matter does not. It remains stable. So that means that some force had to bring that little ball of matter into existence in the first place.
How did you determine that? I mean, first of all, your explanation. I don't want to pick it apart too much, and I'm not a physicist, and this is not a show about.
Well, I mean, that's what you guys told the guy that was a month ago, who was the host, said that the universe started with an extremely condensed ball of matter that exploded. We call that the Big Bang, and the universe is still exploding.
So we don't know the nature of all that. We can't look back beyond the Planck time, which is a slight fraction, the smallest fraction of a second that we can address after the event. What we do know is that it happened, or at least something happened, and the evidence for the Big Bang model seems strong. It could be that the Big Bang model is actually an error. But science stops at that point and says, you know what, right now, we can't go any further than this. We have no mechanism to see behind it, so it's unknown. And yet you are asserting that there must have been something to cause this, and apparently, although I didn't let you actually get that far, you've concluded that the best explanation for this is God. And I don't know how anybody could say that God is the best explanation when it has no explanatory power. We explain things in terms of other things that we understand, and so trying to solve the biggest mystery in the universe by appealing to a bigger mystery, saying God did it is indistinguishable from saying it was magic. And until you can come up with a way to demonstrate the probability of a God existing that is capable of doing this, then your answer, God created the universe, is fundamentally the same as universe-creating pixies created the universe. They are two...
Yeah, but he revealed himself to the Jewish people, and
Why don't you
throughout thousands of years there.
You say that, but what's your evidence that he revealed himself to anybody ever?
In the Old Testament there.
Okay, what reason do you have to think that the Old Testament's true, and why has he stopped revealing himself?
Who said he stopped revealing himself? I see his work all the time.
Well, no, you see things that you attribute to God, but if God were actually still revealing himself, then we wouldn't be having these conversations about the origins of the universe or whether or not Jesus was a historical figure. It would be a settled issue if God was actually revealing himself.
I think that there would be no reason for faith if.
But God was revealing it. As you just said, God.
Excuse me, if he was hitting himself over the head with his presence, there would be no need for faith.
What good is faith, and why is it important? What's wrong with God just revealing himself? He revealed himself supposedly, according to you, to the Jews.
Yeah, right.
So why can't he reveal himself to everybody else? Why are we required to accept it on worse evidence than those people?
All right, I'm going to get out of here, guys, and go grab something to eat. Yeah, I appreciate y'all chilling in the stream, checking out this art. So slowly working my way through this piece. It's taking a little bit longer than I thought, but that's because it's gonna look magnificent when it's done. Yeah, this is gonna be good when it's done. New vids, I'll definitely check them out, bro. Definitely will. But let me go get something to eat, man. I'm hungry as hell. So it was a work day, so and I gotta get up for work in the morning. I'll catch y'all guys next time, yo. Peace. Wrong button.